No, it's fine. So let's begin. Okay. So yes. So there are new Marmakomos. Everybody have the new Marmakomos?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, good. So then we truly can begin. Okay. So we've been discussing the dueling um, competition about this talus, right? But again, it's not really about a talus, about it's an example, an object. Two people each claiming to be the sole owner of an object. Each one has some sort of physical hand, in the struggle, but they're kind of equally balanced. And the question, what we do, and the Mishnah says, "Shnai mosa betalis yachloku," and what we've been examining, in various different ways and with different issues connected to it, is you have to take a shvua and you split the object. And the question we've been discussing is whether or not it's as if there are two different objects or one object, but two completely different um, discrete tfisos, so that each one we apply the normal rule of amotzi mekavera olav. Is that what's happening here? Or is it more that there's a doubt where, we don't know what to do because we don't have enough evidence? Maybe the tvisos, the dueling tvisos, the dueling, grabbing of the talus kind of neutralize each other. And what we say yachloku, it's more in line with Sumchas, who says, that if you, acquire an animal that is pregnant and you do the kinyan, the mode of acquisition is done remotely, and therefore no one actually is present at the moment of the transaction because the animal's in a barn somewhere. So then, if it turns out that the animal, transacted animal, gave birth, and we're not sure if the birth took place, right before the transaction or right after the transaction, so that's the chiddush of Sumchas. Sumchas says mamon amutal besafek kolkin. So some people think, we'll see why in a moment, because it's part of the Shaklatari, the Gemara, on Beis Hamid Beis, where the Gemara says, "Is Sumchus consistent with our Mishnah?" So it sounds like they're thinking that this too is Momana Mutul B'Safek, and certainly the Tosus Rid we discussed believes this, and the Riva and Tosus Balvasra, which we spent quite a bit of time on, who says you could have Yachloku even if there was no Shnai Moksin, even if each one was not holding on to the talus, as long as it's Ein Vadai Ramai, as long as clear there's no definite liar here, there's no cheater here that we know of. I mean, it's possible that everybody means to tell the truth, just somebody made a mistake. Um, Even if there's no, joint tvisa or grabbing of the object, you'd say achlok. So these views are consistent with the perspective that the Schneim Ochsen part is either a small piece or not a piece at all. It's more the dispute and it's a method of resolution. If two people are arguing and we don't have any evidence one way or another, so we do need a way to get past this for the sake of, reigning harmony upon society. And therefore, one way to do that is to say, listen, we don't know what to do, so we're going to split the object. That's one perspective. And the other perspective, of course, is the one that is fiercely, um, advocated by the Balitosis and by the Rajba and by the Rajbam, all of whom say, even though it looks like these two people are canceling each other out, that's not what's happening at all. What's really happening is legally, even if each one's holding on to the edge of the talus, legally, each one has a full, legally exclusive hold or tfisa on half of the talus. And some of them go further, the Rajba and the Rajbam, and say it's as if there are two talesim here. Each one, is holding discreetly half of the talus. And even if it's one talus, so on each half, there's an exclusive discrete tfisa. And therefore, this is not moment mutabasafek kolkin. This is based on the principle that we have in Kol Torah Kula, and that is motzi mechavero alav araya. That if a person wants to make an argument, he wants to extract money from someone else, so the burden of proof is on him, and if he can't prove it, then the status quo remains, and everybody keeps their possession. So if two people are holding on to a talus and legally, physically, they're each holding on to the edge of the talus. But if the legal interpretation is that each one is holding by himself half of the talus, then each one gets to keep their half because the other party can't prove, has the burden of proof to take it away from them, and they don't have that. So those are the two ideas that we're talking about. What we discussed is that there are a lot of consequences to this argument. So, um, we have a principle called migu. Migu means if I am in an argument, again, if we're in a dispute, and I make a certain argument, let's say, and I can't prove it, but I try to kind of establish my credibility, and not to prove it exactly, but to improve my, to give me an advantage over my rival by saying, if I were a liar, I'd have a better lie, right? So in the second case of the Mishnah, we say that if I claim I own the whole object, and the other guy says, you don't own the whole object, you own half the object, and I own half the object. So the Mishnah says that the one who claims the whole will walk away with 3/4. The one who claims the half will walk away with 1/4. And that's when the Bali Tosis asks the question. They say, well, why don't we believe the guy who says that the half is his and give him the full half? Why should we only give him 1/4? After all, he has a migu. If he was a liar, he has a better lie. Meaning, if he wanted to get the object, all he had to do was say that he owns the whole object. Then he'd get half. So since he's honest enough to say that he is a partner and they only half is coming to him, therefore he should lose an extra quarter. There's an advantage in his claim, or at least a stronger reason to, invest trust in him and in his veracity and his honesty, because if he were a liar, then he would win this case. He has a better lie, and therefore, by bypassing a stronger lie, the implication is that he's choosing an honest claim, not a dishonest one. That's a Tosa's question. The Tosas answered that question by saying that would be all fine and good. That would be a good migu. However, ein omer migu lahotzi. Migu lahotzi means that this, this mechanism, migu, this idea that, if there's credibility to your claim, that we will, allow a greater acceptance of your claim. That's only true, says Tosos, when I want to, keep the object. Somebody's trying to take an object from me, and he has a pretty good claim. So my ability to maintain, my ownership on the basis of migu. But if I want to take away from someone else, migu lahotzi, no amrina. But the Bali Tosis, what they don't say is that, and the Tosis disagrees because of this, is that in addition to the question of migu lahotzi or not, there's another question, and that is, if two people are arguing about ownership and each one is holding on to part of the object, on the other half of the object, are you a motzi or are you a maksik? Meaning, you claim the whole thing is yours, you are holding on, you're both holding on. So if you take the view of the Bali Tosis, they're very consistent. They're saying each person is completely holding on, 100% holding on to 50% of the object. So then if I want to go beyond the 50%, and I say, oh, believe me for migu to get me more than 50%, then that's called migu lahotzi. In the case of the second case of the Mishnah, you just have to adjust the case a little bit, because it's basically a dispute about 50%. And the reason that we really split the 50% into 225s, because there's an agreement on both parties that the other 50% belongs to only one party. Remember, Reuven says I own the whole thing. Shimon says I own 50%. So Shimon is conceding that 50% of the talus is undisputed. It definitely belongs to Reuven. What are they disputing? The other 50%. That's why when we say he gets 3/4, he gets 1/4, what we really mean is that they split the 50% of the disputed portion. But if that's the case, so if each of us are holding a quarter alone, so the argument, oh, believe me on my claim of half, because I could have, achieved half by claiming the whole. But either way, according to what they are saying, each one is holding onto a quarter. So my effort to wrest with a W, the other quarter from Ruvain by Migu is actually Migu Lahotzi. However, the Tosas Rid says, no, it isn't, because who says that two people holding on to an object and contesting, who says that each one is a toe face on half? Together they're toe face, or neither are toe face, but it's not true that each one is a full toe face on half, and therefore that's not Migu Lahotzi, that's Migu Lahaksik. So that's one example. Is this a Shvuas Nishba V'Notel or a Shvuas Nishba V'Niftar? We have two types of Shvuos Drabanan. Oh, the Mishnah says that you take an oath when you divide this object. And later on, the Gemara on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph says that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the reason for this oath is a takana, it's an enactment, and the concern was shelo yehei kol echad v'echad tokef b'taliso shel kavera. We want to discourage people from just making illegal claims and profiting from just grabbing people's objects and making a claim. So anybody could grab an object and say that it belongs to him. So, and the other guy's, fighting him. So as a small effort to deter that, Rabbi Yochanan said, you know what? If they're going to do that, they're going to have to take an oath. People were reticent to take oaths, understandably. They don't want to say God's name in vain. They don't want to go to court. They didn't want to violate Shvuas Sheker. So even if they're willing to lie in other ways, Chashul HaMamona lo Chashul HaShvuasa. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Kedei Takana Kedei Shelo Tehei Kol Echad V'Echad Tokef B'Taliso Shel Chavero, as an enactment to ensure that people are discouraged, from just making wild claims and trying to profit, on the basis of chaos, etc. So the fact that he has to take an oath, some people at least, it will deter them, from this kind of behavior. But the question is, what kind of oath is it? So what's happening is he is again, let's take the first case of Mishnah. Two people arguing, each one says the object belongs to them, each one's holding on to the edges of the object. So we say each one gets half, and each one takes an oath saying, I don't own less than half. Meaning each one's basically taking an oath on the part that they are taking. So is that called Nishba V'Notel or Nishba V'Niftar? Meaning there are two types of Shavuos out there. The biblical Shavuos, the biblical oaths, are all Nishba V'Niftar. What are the biblical oaths? Moda B'Miktas. Let's say I say, somebody says to me, you owe me $100. And I respond and I say, I only owe you 20. I do not owe you 100. So I'm Modeh B'Miktas Ataina. I admit part of the claim. That kind of provides a certain reinforcement to the claim itself, because it's not like I rejected it completely. So I have to take a Shvua D'Oraisa, a biblical oath. That Shvua D'Oraisa is, I do not owe the rest of the 80, I only owe the 20, I admit it. That's called a Nishba V'Niftar. I'm swearing and I'm exempt. Similarly, if you have an Eid Echad, right? So let's say normally you need two witnesses, right, in order, to win a legal case, right? In order to be motzi mamon, in order to extract money from someone, all things being equal, the gold standard is two witnesses, right? Two witnesses wins every case, unless it's two witnesses against two witnesses, then it's trouble. But that's called hakchash. But two witnesses win. Let's say I only have one witness. Let's say I say that you owe me $100, and you say I don't owe you anything, right? So that's called kofra kol. So from that point of view, there's no oath. But then if I produce two witnesses, then I win the case. Two witnesses come to court and they say, yeah, he does owe you $100, then you have to pay. But let's say I can only produce one witness. So I claim you owe me $100. You say you don't owe me anything. And I have one witness that backs up my story and says I owe $100, that I'm owed $100. So that is another shvua daraisa. That's a biblical oath. The other guy has to take a shvua. I can't be motzi mamon because I only have one, not two witnesses. But he doesn't just walk away either. He is obligated to defend his claim in court by taking a biblical oath. So what is that oath? A nishba v'notel or a nishba v'niftar? The answer is nishba v'niftar, right? Meaning he's swearing and he is going to thereby be exempt. I say you owe me $100. My witness backs me up. So you are obligated to swear in court, I do not owe $100, and then you walk away. Nishba v'niftar. The third shvua daraisa, we'll discuss much more about this as we go forward, is what's called shvuas hashomrim. Shvuas hashomrim refers to a case where I entrust my object with someone else. Reuven gives an object to Shimon to watch. He entrusts him as a shomer. And then let's say something happens to the object. Well, let's say he's shomer chinam, meaning he's not getting paid. He's doing this out of the goodness of his heart. He's watching this fellow's object. And let's say it gets struck by lightning. Okay. But no one knows that it got struck by lightning except for the shomer chinam. So he has to account for, the guy comes and says, I'd like my object back. And you say, oh, remember that lightning strike the other night? Right? It missed everything except for your object. So he has to take a shvua to say, I want to go into all the detail, but to say what happened to the object, to say that he didn't, use it illegally, that's shalosh shlachti bayad. But basically, that's the third biblical oath of civil law, anyway. And again, what is he basically saying? Nishba v'notel or nishba v'niftar. He's saying lightning hit the object, and I'm not a shoel, I'm not a borrower, and therefore I don't have, responsibility for accidents. I'm not liable for accidents. I'm only liable for pshia, for negligence. That's what shomer chinam is. And therefore, I hereby take an oath that, I am exempt. So that's nishba v'niftar. However, rabbinic oaths are many more rabbinic oaths than there are biblical oaths. And here again, there are two types. There's more than two types, but one is called nishba v'niftar. For example, shvuas heses, what's known as shvuas heses, even a kofar kol. If I say you owe me $100 and the guy says, no, I don't owe you anything. I've never met you, or I paid you, whatever he says. I don't owe you a thing. So Minat Torah, biblically, there's no obligation and there's no oath. But rabbinically, they made an oath called shvuas heses, which means he has to take a lesser oath, just acknowledging his claim that he doesn't owe a penny. That's nishba v'niftar d'Rabbanan, a rabbinic nishba oath that exempts it. However, there's a whole group of oaths that are captured by the Mishnah in the beginning of the 7th parak of Shavuos, and also in the 9th parak of Ksuvos, different oaths, two different lists, that are called nishba v'notel. I take a shvua, I take the object, right, and but I'm obligated to swear that it belongs to me. Okay? For example, the Gemara says, like, if you have a certain case where, like, you have a sachir, a worker, and, he is in a position, to know better whether or not he was paid or not. So he'll take and there's some dispute whether he was or wasn't paid. So it's a nishba, but he'll take a shvua, he'll take an oath in court, and then he gets paid. That's called nishba v'notel, meaning he takes a shvua, and then he takes from the other fellow what is coming to him. So basically what I'm asking is, the shvua of Rabbi Yochanan in the Mishnah of Shnayim Otzim Batalas Yachloku, right? Is that a nishba v'niftar or is that a nishba v'notel?
V'notel.
So, notel, you're saying. So the answer is, depends how you look at it. So the Rambam actually says, we'll see this in a minute, that it's a nishba v'notel. Actually, look at the Rambam for a moment. This is the new Marmakomos. I hope everybody has them. We're going to be examining several things about them. Here.
What
So,
page?
here, 1 second. This is on the first page. It says Rambam Toid V'Nitan Tes. That means Parak Tes, Parak 9. Look at the first halacha. We're going to examine this more fully in just a minute. The Ram says, Shnaim she'oksim b'kli achad. Everybody have it? Two people are holding on to a single object. Oshe yirochvin al gabi. This is the Mishnah, right? Oshe yirochvin al gabi behema achas. Or they are traveling, they're riding on an animal, a single animal, two people riding on a single animal. Oshe echad rochev echad manig. Or one is leading the animal and one is riding on the animal, right? Now, this next case, I'm going to read quickly, but that's a lot of the excitement in the Rambam, so I'm going to get back to it in a minute. I'm just forewarning. O yoshvim b'tzad arema shalchitim umunachos besimta o b'chatzer shel shneim. I'm not going to get into it right now. I'm just going to hold off for 5 minutes. Anyways, but in all these cases, zeh omer hakol shali, each one is making a mutually exclusive claim about full ownership of this object. So kol echad mishneim, each one of them nishba, takes an oath, binikitas chayfetz. That's very interesting. That means it's they put like an object, they're holding on to a Sefer Torah, something like that, which shows it's a serious rabbinic oath, right? She'ein lo bazeh hadavar pachos michatzio, that he doesn't have less than half of the object, and then you divide it. And then the Rambam adds, just for good measure, Ushvua zu takanas chachamim. This shvua is a rabbinic enactment. Kedei shelo yehi kol echad tofes b'talisa shel chaveiro v'notel below shvua. So he's only notel with a shvua. This word v'notel is actually not the exact word that the Gemara uses. If you look at the Gemara for a moment, on just 1 second, on Gimel Amud Aleph, and this is just, how you have to read Rambam. You have to pay attention to, every word, the order, the language. So if you look at the Gemara in Gimel Amud Aleph, when the Gemara explains the purpose of the Shvua, we'll get back to this Gemara, but we've seen it already. If you see the asterisk in the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, Shvua zu takanas chachamim. This is a rabbinic enactment, this oath, shelo yehi kol echad v'echad, so that each person would not be motivated. In fact, he would be discouraged or deterred from to miholech b'tokef b'taliso shel chavero, to go and to grab, right, a talis that belongs to his friend. But what the Rambam doesn't, what the Rambam says, I'll look at the Rambam for a minute. Takonas chachamim he kedei shelo yehi kol echad tofes b'taliso shel chavero, right? The notel below shvua. So the Rambam's description of the achloku is embedded in his description of the shvua, but he adds something that doesn't appear in the Gemara. The Gemara is neutral. The Gemara just says they enacted this oath to discourage people from grabbing other people's property. There's nothing in this text that signifies whether or not the chalukah, the division, in the end of the day, is considered to be retaining a part, or is considered to be taking a part, seizing a part, right? This formulation of Rabbi Yochanan doesn't even relate to that. But if you look at there, all so subtly, when the Rambam writes over the Gemara, he changed it, and he has Ushvua zu takanis chachamim kedei shelo yekal echad tofes b'talisa shel chavero. That part is the equivalent of tokef b'talisa shel chavero. But then he adds the notel below shvua, and he will take it away without a shvua. So we insist that he take it away only with a shvua, which means that the Rambam thinks this is a nishba b'notel, which, by the way, is very consistent with his view that it's a shvua b'nekitas chayfetz, a Shavuos Hesses, for example, Nishma V'Niftar doesn't, according to many, have a Nikitas Kefes, according to the Rambam. So the Rambam's view is that there's a Nishma V'Notel. However, doesn't say that in the Gemara. And it's not clear at all. So what does it depend on? So partially it may depend on exactly the issue that we were just discussing. Remember we said, oh, is it migu lahotzi or migu lahachzik? The answer is the half that I walk away with. How do we look at that? So according to the Rashbam and according to the Rashba and according to Tosas and Babitzi and Bava, these are all things that we've seen. Basically, what I walk away with is the half that even when we're struggling together, I have tfisa on. Meaning the two of us are competing, but according to these views, each one of us has a full exclusive hold on 50% of the object. And what am I walking away with? 50% of the object. After taking a shvua that says, I own at least 50% of the object. So is that a shvuas nishma v'notel? Or is that a shvuas nishma v'niftar? I mean, I already have the object legally. You can make the case, not so sure, that it's a shvuas nishma v'niftar. But according to the Rambam, that isn't true. It's your notel. So we'll see in a moment. That's already our first hint, maybe, that according to the Rambam, the Shnayim Ochsim are not broken up into two different tfisos like Tosas and the Rashbam and the Rashba. But maybe it's more like the Riva, the Tosas Rid, or maybe even the Ramban and others, which is they're holding it together, but neither one is holding any part of the object by himself. In which case, when we split it, we're actually whatever part you walk away with, you're taking away, right, from the other person on some level, which is why it's an Nishma V'Notel. So that's a second issue. The third issue may very well be the issues that we discussed last week, some of them, which is the factor of Vadai Ramai or Ein HaChaluka Yechola Lios Emes, do they apply to Shnayim Oaks and Batalis? Meaning, again, the Gemara on Kiron, Gimel and Aleph seem to say, the Gemara asks the question, if two people deposit an object, with a third person, and now there's some confusion whether who is the owner of the more expensive object. So like two people, each one entrusted an object to a third person. Each object is of different value. One is worth more than the other. So now the dispute is which of the two depositors, right, is the owner of the more valuable object. Each one is claiming that he's the one who deposited the more valuable object. That's the Mishnah Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph and the Gemara Gimel Amud Aleph, which you've seen a couple of times. So the Gemara says there's an equation between, the Gemara says, why isn't there an equation, between the Mishnah of Shnayim Oks and Batalis, which we say Yachloku, and the Mishnah on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, quoted here in Gimel Amud Aleph, which says, Yehemunach ad sheyavo Eliyahu, which is, well, we don't know what to do because we have conflicting claims. The trustee who's holding on to the object, for whatever reason, he's not liable, because he doesn't know who gave him what. There's some excuse. So that's not the issue for the moment. And each one's claiming that he's the one who entrusted the more valuable object. So what we say is, so the Gemara says, why? Why not say Yachloku? Or why not say Yemunach Shavalio in the case of the Mishnah? Anyway, the Gemara's answer is that in the case of Yehemunach Shavalio, in the case of the trustee, the Gemara has two different answers, one for Yossi, one for the Chachamim. Number one, it's Vadai Ramai. Somebody's definitely lying, as opposed to the Mishnah of Shnayim Oks and Batalis, where it's possible that there's a misconception, a misunderstanding. Maybe they both picked it up at the same time, and each one thought he picked it up earlier. But in the case of entrusting an object to a third party, there's no room for misunderstanding, right? One of them gave him a gold whatever, and the other one gave him a copper whatever. So, there's no confusion. So that's the Gemara's distinction. Vade Ramai, ain't Vade Ramai. Another distinction the Gemara makes, very similar, is Ha'ima Chaluka Yechola Liosemes or not. Forget about who's lying and who's not lying. Is it when you say Achloku, is it possible that you hit a home run? Is it possible that it's true? The answer is yes, because maybe they picked up the object at the same time, and either they didn't realize it or they're not admitting it. But it would end up being, it's not likely, but there's a possibility that you're getting an absolutely just, ruling, yachloku. But in the case of the trustee, you can't get a just ruling. You can't split it because if you split one has a gold object, the other one has a copper object, and they're not partners. There's no possibility that they're partners, at least no reasonable possibility. So these are distinctions the Gemara makes. So what I was trying to explain was, if you hold that the Shnai Moksum B'talas Yachloku is based on each one having an independent tfisa, so then why should we really care about Vade Rama and why should we care about Chaluka Yicholi Yosemes? Well, all we're really saying is that we're invoking a universal rule called Hamotzi Mechavero Alavaraya. When we say Hamotzi Mechavero Alavaraya, usually it doesn't matter whether it's Chaluka Yicholi Yosemes or Vade Rama. It's just the idea of Hamotzi Mechavero Alavaraya is the idea that when in doubt, right, the burden of evidence is to change the status quo, right? Otherwise, you leave the status quo. So if we really believe that each one is holding on fully to half of the object, right, then it shouldn't matter to us. All that should be irrelevant. However, if we think that this is a chalukah b'torah safek, meaning it's not that each one is holding on to half and therefore we give each person his half, but they're both holding on. We don't know what to do. So the best thing to do is compromise and to split the object. So then, does it make sense if we might say that, but we're not necessarily going to say it if there's Vade Ramai or if Ena Chaluka Yichol Yosemes, right? So there are numerous issues connected with this. I'll give you one more that's very interesting. And it's something we'll get back to also. If you turn for a moment to Vav Amud Aleph, 6a in the Gemara. Gemara has a very fascinating discussion. It leads to an even bigger fascinating discussion called Takva Kohen, famous, one of the most celebrated themes or sugyas in Shas, Takva Kohen. If you say the word Takva Kohen to somebody who, is a seasoned Talmudist, he'll know exactly what you're talking about right away. And, hopefully either he'll smile or he'll wince, depending on whether he likes complex topics or, shies away from them. But Takva Kohen is a shame davar. Nobody, in the know, doesn't react to it. So this is all introduced by the following case. The Gemara here in Vav Amud Aleph, if you can turn to it, says Boy Rab Zera. In the middle of not in the middle, I would say 2/5 down the page, you see the two dots. It says Boy Rab Zera. So Boy Rab Zera, Takfa Echad Bifanenu. This is going on. The background is Shnai Moksum B'talas, right? Two people arguing about this ownership of this object. Each one's grabbing on a piece of the object. And now what happens is Takfa Echad Bifanenu, that one of them wrestles it away from the other guy. So the Gemara says, Mahu, what do you do then? Like we know what to do when they're both holding on, but let's say one guy, he wins the struggle and he ends up with the object. What do you do then? So the Gemara says, Heichadami. Heichadami means, like, what's the case? I deshasik oduye odele. So when this guy overpowered the other guy and he finally came up with the odds, he's now the only one holding on to the talus. What was the other guy's reaction? If he was silent, so it sounds like he, is kind of agreeing that it wasn't his object to begin with. Otherwise, why is he going down without a fight? Why is he silent in the face of this new aggression? Right. So if he's quiet, he's shasik, oduya odele. Ida katzavach, if he's screaming and yelling, how dare you, this an even greater affront. It's bad enough that you grabbed half the talus. Now you're, stealing the whole thing. If he's yelling and screaming all the way, so my habalel mevad. Since we already know that there are claims and counterclaims about half, just the fact that he's stronger than him and he beats him up and he wins the object, well, why would that change the legal reality? We normally have a principle that says that tfisa la'achar leidas asafek, that if somebody grabs something after there's already a known question about the legality, right? So tfisa la'achar leidas asafek is not usually effective. Now, we have a rule, motzi mechaver olav araya. That means, if you come upon this case and one person is a muhsak, right? We say the burden of proof is on him, is on the other person to take it away from him. But if you're already aware of the dispute, and then somebody changes the reality on the ground, we'll talk about kol dalam gavar. That's an interesting question in light of this. But if in other words, if there's a dispute and then in front of us, after we know of the court already knows of the dispute, and then they see one guy grab the object from the other guy, so now they're going to say, aha, I have it now. It doesn't work that way, right? So that's what the Gemara means. If the guy's screaming and yelling, how dare you, further exacerbate this problem. It's bad enough you took half of the object or grabbed onto my object. Now you're overpowering me and stealing it from me even more. So my Havilah Mebed, we're not going to reward this, clearly extra, legal behavior, meaning it's legally insignificant because we already know of the doubt before he came up with the object. So what's the case? So the Gemara comes up with a compromise. Lo tzricha de shasik meikara, the hadar tzavach. Case is that initially he was quiet when this happened, and then a few minutes later he started screaming. Well, what's the problem? What do you do? Do we emphasize his initial silence and say, this proves that he isn't the real owner, otherwise he wouldn't have let this go by? Right? Odilma, since finally he did scream, hashtag goy milsa, the haidashasik mikara, savar rabbanan. So that maybe the reason he was quiet to begin with is because he knew that, the doubt had already, that this is already a safek, and he knew that the chachamim or the bezdin, witnessed this additional initiative of the other party. So he wasn't worried about it because he knew that he could overturn it in court because it's a tfisa lacha ledes safek. So then the Gemara goes back and forth about this question. Okay. So, and the Gemara then the Gemara wants to know, what we call takfa kohen, which I'm not going to get into at the moment. Okay. So the question really is, what is this doubt? Like, what is this question? Is it really a question whether or not an initial silence followed by screaming and yelling, is to be interpreted as acquiescence, and then a change of heart, or the later outcry, reflects, that the initial quiet was the exception? I mean, are we really in a state of doubt about what happened here, and that's the end of the story, and that's the suffix, or is there something else going on here? Namely, maybe everybody agrees that there's a suffix hoda'a, suffix tzavach, but maybe the question is what the state of Shnaim Ochzim Betalis is, meaning when both of them are holding on to the object. So how do we look at that? Right? Do we say, well, at this point, each one is vadai tofes b'chetzi, like the Balitosis and the Rajba and the Rajbam, in which case, if we're not sure whether the silence slash outcry is either a silence or an outcry, what we should say is we're not sure it's a suffix, so leave things where they were. Where were they? The answer is they were, to use the language of Tosos, kol echad bivada yeshlo tfisa ubailus bachetzi. So the suffix hoda'a, is basically too weak to challenge the vadai yachloku. However, if you take the view that to begin with, when you have two people grabbing an object and both of them are claiming full ownership, it's not that each one is a full toe-face on half, and therefore each one has a strong claim on the half. Let's say it's moment amuta b'safek, and the cholkin is just a way of imposing some sort of order or way forward, so that this strife doesn't haunt you for the rest of your days. But basically, we don't know what to do. Then no one has ownership, so we're splitting it. So then what we're saying now is, you had a suffix chaluka, and now there's a suffix whether you even have that. So now you have a suffix chaluka, suffix it fully belong, suffix hoda. Why should the suffix chaluka take it away from the suffix hoda? So this actually is the famous interpretation of the Chidushe Haran. If you look here in the New Makomos on page 3, this is the Ran. It says Shita Mekubetzes B'Metzia Vavam Aleph Ran. It's also in the regular Chidushe Ran. So he says the following: Lo Tzricha de Ishtuk. Everybody have this? This is the last entry on page 3 of the new Marmakomos. I hope everybody is following with me. I'm not hearing. Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. You're keeping me, honest here. Everybody else is a name. I can't tell if they're following or not.
So, okay. Well, we just don't want to interrupt.
Yeah. No. I'm not criticizing. I just want to make sure. Okay. Lo tzricha de ishkat. So this is what the Ran says. Nirali, the bayan hachim afarsha. This is very creative Ran. This is like also one of a very, very famous comment of the Ran, because it's a very conceptually, it's like a conceptual breakthrough here. But we've been discussing this issue, but you'll see in a moment. So he says, nearly the bayan hachim afar. What is this question of shosak ulabesof tzavach? What effect does that have on shnaim oksim betalis when somebody grabs it? He says, the vadai pshita lan haid ishtuk ulabesof tzavach ika lemitle behoda given the ishtuk the ika lememer delav hoda given the besof tzavach. He says, listen, there's not much more to say about, he's silent and then he cries out. There's nothing much more to say other than, we're not sure whether it means that he's, acquiescing or he's continuing to fiercely oppose. We have a question mark about that, right? So what's the issue in the Gemara? Elahachi kami bailan, says the Ran brilliantly. The issue isn't to figure out this ambivalent hoda'a slash tzavach. We know that that's a question mark. The real question is, what came before? When it was Shnai Moksim Betalis, and we were going to say Achloku, was that a question mark? Or was that an exclamation point? Was that a vadai or was that a suffix? Because if it was a vadai, then ein suffix motzim b'dei vadai. But if it was a suffix, then you have another suffix. So this is how he explains it. Mi amrinan talazum betchila b'suffix haisa omedes. Shall we say, listen, when both of them are grabbing onto talis, each one making mutually exclusive rival claims, so we didn't know where we stood either, right? We were going to divide it, but not out of a position of strength, saying, oh, he for sure has half. He for sure has half. We're saying, we don't know what to do. No one is stronger than the other one, and so we're going to divide it. We didn't know who belonged to who. the kivin shekain, af safek hoda mahani lahamida b'shur zeh shetokfa. So if this safek hoda now exists against the background of a safek yachloku, so why don't we say, well, maybe he was moden. Why take it away from him now, right? It's true. It's tfisa, la'achar latest asafek b'safek hoda, but it's the latest asafek, right? Didn't have a definitive solution, so you went from one question mark to another question mark. How do you take it away from him? Oh, Dilma, what's the other side? Even the katzavach. The ikal remember da ishta glab mishum hoda he ain't tolen lomar shema hoda. If you should tell us zuaf mitchila lo haisam butelis besafek. No, maybe they were looking at it the wrong way. Maybe the previous state of Shnai Moks and Batalis is not a tie. It's not a situation where neither position is, established. It's the opposite. There was no doubt. It's rather anan sadi demanded toughest ID day, demanded toughest ID day. This is again a quote of the Gemara in Gimel Amud Aleph that Tosas also quotes. We take the legal position that each one holding on to part of the talis is the equivalent of each one having a definite exclusive hold on each half of the talis. So now the kivin shekain ain't safek hoda motzi midei vadai. So now we have a safek hoda because this guy was shosak ulabasov tzavach, and you're going to take it away from his vadai tvisa of before because of if it was a vadai hoda you would, but if it's a safek hoda, then ain't safek motzi midei vadai. So then he goes on and he continues this analysis. Im tirtza tefarish d'chiyam amrina lo dilma kiva de katzavach hachi kamrinan afilu nomar shetala zu besafek hoysem munachas betchila ein ma'midin osa becheska zeh shetokva mishum deleka l'svuke b'odah klal kiva de tzavach igloi milsa bevadai ta'u shasak savar l'kachazir abana v'la mishum odah klal. So or does everybody agree that originally it was only a safek? Right? And now the question is whether or not it's a vadai hoda or it's a safek hoda. And if it's a vadai hoda, it can be motzi midei safek. But if it's a safek hoda, then it can't. So this is the analysis of the Ran. We'll show later on that the Ran is very consistent in that he generally has a pretty ambivalent view of Shnai Mosa B'tal. So what I've been trying to show is that this argument about whether or not you look at Chalukah of Shnai Mosa B'talis, each one, being a tofes in their part, vadai, or this is a kind of momon amuta b'safek holken, this big issue has all sorts of consequences, legal consequences. Is it migol lahotzi? Is it migol lahachnis? Is it a shuas nishba v'notel? Is it a shuas nishba v'niftar? Do factors like vadai ramai and Chalukah Yecholios MS, do they apply here or not? And for the Ran, what would happen if you have a safek hoda'a, right? That and a tfisa la'achar leidas safek after you had the state of shnayim oksin betalis? Would you say ein safek motzim b'dei vadai, or would you say to begin with it's only a safek and therefore it's a safek hoda? Maybe you shouldn't take it away from the newly minted tofes. So there are other issues as well, but this is part of the grand debate. So now I want to turn my attention back to the Rambam. Okay, so what we saw in Halacha Zayin was that the Rambam characterizes, he has a slight, emendation, addition, whatever you want to call it, to the language of Rabbi Yochanan and the Gemara in Gimel Amud Aleph, right, where he just very, very, very subtly, inserts the idea that you're a notel here, that you, with the shvua, you are taking, from the other fellow. At least that's what he seems to say. Is there anything to back up this interpretation of the Rambam beyond that language and the characterization of the shvua probably is a nishba v'notels and the kitas chayfetz? Are there other indications that the Rambam really thinks right? That instead of seeing this as, two different objects or one object with two different tvisos, that he really thinks, that it is, a chaluka b'Torah safek, and that the two, the simultaneous tvisos, hardly establish anyone as a tophes exclusively on anything. So there are two other very strong indications that this might be Shitas Rambam. What are those two? So I glossed over a line in the Rambam. So let's go back to Halacha Zayin. Shnayim shahayu ochazin b'kli echad. Two people are holding on to a single object. Oshe rochvin al gabi behema achas. Or they are riding on an object, on an animal. Oshe echad rochev echad manig. It's all in the Mishnah. But then the Rambam adds a line which is totally not in the Mishnah or in any other Gemara. As far as we know, this is a Rambam in original insertion, right? If that's the case, our antennae are very much, focused on the, significance of this. Let's see if there are any clues to be had here. So the Rambam adds words, O Yoshvin B'tzararema, or let's say two people are sitting next to a pile of chitim, shel chitim, umunachos besimto b'chatzar shel shneim. This heap, we'll call it, of chitim, of wheat, is located either in a simta or in Rishus Harabim, meaning not in Reuven's domain and not in Shimon's domain, but in some sort of a neutral territory, either the public domain, or if it isn't public, but it isn't private, it doesn't belong to one of them either. It's like a simta, okay? So meaning these two people are sitting next to a heap of chitim, Ze omer hakol shali, right? Kol echad mishneim nishba b'nekitas chayfet she'eno b'zeh davar pachos michetzi v'achloku. And then again, shvu zut hakonis chachamim kedei shelo yeyeh kol echad tofes b'talisa shel chavero b'notel below shvua. Okay. So where does the Rambam, this additional line of the Rambam caught everybody's eye because it's not only is it new, but it is spectacular. What makes it spectacular? No one's holding on to the wheat. They're sitting next to the wheat. And the wheat isn't in one of their possessions or domains. It's in a public or in a neutral domain. So can you have Yachloku, the equivalent of Shnai Moksin Batalis without Shnai Moksin? Well, the answer is the Riva in Tosas Bal Basra, the second answer in Tosas Bal Basra, which we discussed a few times already, actually says that as well, even though it's counterintuitive in the language of the Mishnah. Mishnah says Shnai Moksin Batalis. So the Riva says, nah, lav dafka oksin. They don't have to be both holding on to it. They just have to be, equally balanced in their claims, without evidence. As long as it's not this is the view of the Riva, right? As long as it's not Vadai Ramai, as long as we're not, as long as there's no evidence that somebody's lying here, right? Even if neither side is holding on to the object, you'll still split it. Now, if neither side's holding on to the object and you're still going to split it, obviously that has nothing to do with the principle of tfisa or motzi mechaver olav, because no one's holding on to the object, right? So if you look at the Hagos Maimunios.
May I ask something when you have a chance, Rabbi?
Yeah, just give me one more minute.
Yes, of course.
So in the Hagos Maimunios is a work of Ashkenaz, one of the Ashkenaz, Balei Tosas, student of the Maram Rutenberg, like the Mordechai and the, and the Or Zarua. So the Hagos Maimunios Ozayin on the Rambam says, Mitoch Lishono, from the language of the Rambam, it would appear, Niradato Kiritzva, that he agrees with what I call the Riva in Tosas and Bava Basra. The Lav Dafka Oksin, it doesn't have to be that they're actually holding on to the object, Mid Amar Talmud Alema Masisa Delok Rabbi Yossi. Because let's remember that on Daf Gimel, Amid Aleph, the Gemara asked a question, and the question assumed that there was an equation between the trustee who's holding an object for two different people and the case of Shnayim Oksim Batalis. So while the Bali Tosas and the Rajba deal with that in their own way, the Riva thought that proved that you don't really need Ochsin, because if the trustee's holding the object for the more expensive object for Ruvain and the less expensive object for Shimon, then they're not both holding on. Reuven and Shimon are not both holding on to the more expensive object. So that's what the Gosma Munios is referring to. He says, the lav dafka oksim bid Amar Talmuda lema masisin delok Rabbi Yossi elamai Rabbanan. That's the Gemara. Hamina nashaye murachat shiavo aliyahu hanamik shardami. The Gemara alma bedamile. You see, the Gemara compares Shnayim oksim betalis lishaer to the case of a trustee holding on to an object for either one of two people, but not both, the expensive one. The ein shneim muksakim. So why is it yachloku? Talmud yachloku v'lo called alim gavar. The reason we don't say, that the strongest one wins here, we say split it, is kahi arva, just like the boat case, the parakaskas abatim. The hakar ema travayu b'hadadi adadi agbahu o kanu. Utzelo karashi ukarbenu tam shapirshu dafka oksim. And this is unlike the more prevalent view of the Balei Tosfos, which is that you only say achloku when two people are holding on. No, the Riva thinks it's wrong. And the Rambam, by adding this case of Shnayim Yoshvim B'tzad Arema Shel Chitim, which is a case where neither one is holding on, proves that he also doesn't think you have to be holding on. He thinks that they have to be equally balanced and there shouldn't be a Ramai. That is the Agos Maimonios is reading of the Rambam. Now, of course, if that is true, then it works very nicely in the diuk, in my insight that the Rambam added a word here in Rabbi Yochanan, the notel below shvua, that you can't be notel below shvua, namely that it's nishba the notel, because according to the Rambam, you're not taking it away from the other person, or you're not retaining what the half that you are tofes, right? Because you don't even necessarily have to be holding on to it at all. So what are you doing? You're taking it from a joint state of an equal, state of dispute. So both points in the Rambam, the extra line in which neither of them seem to be holding on, as well as the notel, would seem to reinforce the view that according to the Rambam, Shnayim Osim Batalis is not based on two different tfisos. It's based on no tfisos. It's based on the quality of their claims, not any kind of stature of their tfisa. Now, if this is true, just give me one more minute. There are two things I wanted to add to this, and then I'll take the question. This would work very nicely with something else that the Rambam does. So if you look at halacha tes in the Rambam for a moment, the Rambam says, this is something we've seen already, so let me get background. The Gemara on Dav Zayin Omid Aleph 7a, says, let's look at that for just for a minute, and then I'll take the question. The Gemara on Dav Zayin Omid Aleph says, Tan Rabbanan, I'm sorry, well, no, I said it wrong. Tani Rab Taklifa Bar Marava Kamed Rabavo, sorry. You can see the little dalet. Shnayim Adukim Betalis, two people hold on to a talis. Zen notal makom shiyado magas, v'zen notal makom shiyado magas. Each one gets to keep the amount that they are holding. The hashar, if they're not holding the 100% between them, so the rest, whatever's left, cholkim b'shava. And then the Gemara says, mach b'lei rabavo u'b'shvua. Okay? So what is that? So as we explained, let's say one person is holding on to 50% of the talis, and the other person is holding on to 30% of the talis. Okay? And there's 20% that's in the middle. So what the Gemara is saying is, Ruvain ends up taking 50% that he's holding, 10% half of the in between, and Shimon ends up taking 30% that he's holding and 10% the half in between. So they split it 60-40. So the Gemara says, this is the Gemara that says, well, what are you talking about? The Mishnah says, if two people are holding on, that they split it. This isn't splitting, this is 60-40. Says the Gemara, Amar Papa de Tvisi Bekarkashta. The Mishnah is talking about a case where they're holding on to the edges. Here we're talking about where each one is holding on to a very substantial part, but unevenly. One is holding on to, what do we say, 40%, 50%. One's holding on to 30%, right? And there's a 20% that, is in the middle. So here it's 60-40. If each one's holding on to the edge, then it's going to be 50-50. So the question is, the Gemara said ubishvua, and there's two gersos. So the Balitosis already say, Nira de logarsi vashar, da'afamesha biyado magasi shava. This is the question. Is the shvua that we read about in the Mishnah, Shnai Mosa Batalas Yachloku b'shvua, and that the Gemara is referring to, is that only on the in-between part, or is it also on the part that each one is physically totally controlling? In other words, does Ruvain have to take a shvua on all 60%, including the 50%, or only on the 10% of the 20%? Does Shimon have to take a shvua only on the 10% of the 20%, meaning the part in the middle, or does he have to take a shvua also on his, exclusive 30%? So the Bali Tosa say, yeah, you got to take shvua on everything. But the Rambam, look at the Rambam now. The Rambam says in Halacha Tes, Hoyu shnai madukim betalis, two people grabbing onto an object. Ze omer kula shali, ze omer kula shali, each one claiming the object belongs exclusively to him. So if we're not holding on bekarkashta, it's ze notal ad mokom shiado magas, the ze notal ad mokom shiado magas. Each takes fully the amount that he totally controls. V'hashar cholkin b'shaveh, and the part that neither of them is holding on to physically, they split. Right? Achar shenish bayin. So what did the shvua go on according to the Rambam? Only the middle part, not the part that each one is completely holding. And how to accept that, it's not completely true, but it's conceptually true. That's the next line in the Rambam. V'yesh lekalecha the galgal al chavero shekoma shenotal kedin notal. There's an institution in Jewish law called Gilgul Shvua. That means that if you're already in a related din Torah, you're taking an oath, we can expand the oath. It means literally roll over, right? Gilgul means legalgel, means to roll. So we say, oh, you're taking the shvua, include this other claim in it. This claim in its own right would not warrant an oath, but since you take an oath in this din Torah anyway, so just expand the oath to include the other part as well. So what is the Rambam saying? In principle, if we had only Yada Magas, let's say, for example, each one was holding on exactly to 50%, or not even, let's say that way. Let's say one guy was holding on to 60% and the other guy was holding on to 40%. According to the Rambam, there'd be no shvua, there'd be no oath in that case. But in a case where there's also a shah, there's something in the middle, since you have to take a shvua for that, and it's all connected to the same claim, so we roll another shvua on each of them, and you have to take shvua on everything.
Is it one shvua with two components, or it's a separate shvua?
That's a good question. That is a good question. That's a Gilgul Shvua issue. That's kind of a little bit controversial. But it doesn't really matter for us for right now, right? I mean, is it an additional shvua or is it an expansive shvua?
Right. Okay. I mean, if it's just an expansion, so then it seems easy. But to make you make a new shvua, that seems a little bit more extreme.
Yeah. So that's the question. Usually, it probably means a new shvua, but it doesn't make a difference for our purposes.
Okay.
I mean, for what we're discussing right now, because what I'm saying is, if it were 50-50 or 60-40, and there was no separate thing to split, there would be no shvua according to the Rambam at all. That's what's important. That's the important takeaway. Meaning, for the Rambam, qualitatively, there's a difference between each person holding on to a section, and them actually holding the edges. The next halacha on the Rambam is, let's look at the next one, halacha yud. Hayazeh oches bechutin shebesfas hatalis. That's where it comes from, the Gemara. If each one's holding on to the edge, right? V'zeh bechutin shebesafa acheres. Each one's holding on to a different edge of the object. Kolkin kula b'shava. You split it completely. Achar shenishbain. And then he adds, Kol chaluka hamura kan bedamim. Lo sheyafsidu atzma shel kli o shel talis o sheyamitzu abehema. No one thinks that you're going to, cut the animal in two, or you're going to, shred this object, and really split it into two. We're talking about financially. We're talking about the value. Okay. So what comes out of the Rambam? Comes out of the Rambam is, and the Tosas disagrees, just to make it clear. The Balei Tosas say that, no, the Gemara didn't mean that. The Gemara meant the Shavua applies whether it's in the part that's in the middle that you're splitting, or in the part that each one isn't fully controlling. Either way, you have to make the Shavua, not Gilgal's Shavua. That's the Shavua of Rabbi Yochanan. That's what Tosas says. So what I'm trying to point out is, for the Rajba and for the Rajbam, actually, this idea of Achi Magas is the paradigm of Shnai Mochsim Batalis Yachloku. The Rajbam in Bava Basra, if you remember, we discussed this already, when he quotes the Mishnah in Shnai Mochsim Batalis, he makes it seem like the case is Yado Magas, which it's not, because the Gemara says explicitly that it's not. But it's his way of saying, legally and conceptually, there's no difference. The cases are physically different, but the principle is the same, because for the Rajbam and for the Rajba, even if each one's holding on the edge, it's as if each one's holding 50%, in the sense that each one is the exclusive toe face on his 50%, and the other guy's on his 50%, but there's no joint tfisa. We split it up as if it's two different objects. So it doesn't matter whether they're holding karkashta or they're holding achiyot magas. Either way, you're going to take a shvua. And for the Rajbam and the Rajba, it's kaman de cholak, kaman de pasak. They like using these terms interchangeably. What they're saying is, the way we understand this din is, this is a difference that is legally insignificant, because all cases are conceptually achiyot magas. But according to the Rambam, that's not true. In one case, you have a shvua, in the other case, you don't. And even if you end up having a shvua in both cases, that's only because of Gilgul shvua, but you wouldn't have it if it was a complete 100% Yona Magas, whether it was even or imbalanced. So, but that's perfectly excellent for the Rambam. Why? Because the Rambam introduced Shnayim Yoshvim B'tzad Arema Sholchitim, where you don't even have to be holding it at all. And the Rambam said that you're being notel, and that's why you need a shvua. You're not being notel according to the Rajba and the Rajbam, and maybe even Balei Tosas. You're being machzik b'shelcha. You're not being notel shel chavero or shel shneim. So all three of these elements seem to demonstrate that the Rambam actually believes that when you have two rival tfisos, either they cancel each other out completely, but at minimum, they don't establish discrete tfisos that are exclusive to each party. And therefore, his whole take on the relationship between all of these various issues is different. There was a question, Stephen. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. The hitam. As you
Hitam
say,
is
it's a
wheat.
strange. Yeah, no, but it's a strange word. A pile of wheat. Since he's the original thing. My point is this. Actually, since I'm a Nazir, my thing is grapes, but it's also brought down that it could be wheat, and so wheat is an object between, in my opinion, Hava and Adam. But in this case, this is what I'm trying to bring up here. The whole thing
There's some
has to do
question
with
whether the Eitz Hadas was wheat or not, or
right,
grape.
right.
Right.
So the point is, you see, this brings in everything that I wanted to say, because I think it has to do with Chokmah and Bina, or Abba and Ima. and the line between them, which is a union that is never broken. So it's actually a fifth commandment of kaved Abba and Ima, and that the union is and everything that you've said tonight, I can break down into the letter Yud. Yud, as I told you 2 weeks ago, Yud Vav Dalet, or Yud Hey Hey, and all our divisions can be brought down into this. And
Well,
so,
again,
my question to you is, otherwise, I'm thank you for letting me say this, but my question to you is, has anybody said anything like that in your readings? Because you know all these.
Not that I'm aware. This is very.
What? Then that
means
means
a very
no.
original, mystical view of it, for sure. Normally we think it's wheat or bar. It could be wheat. It could be barley. It could be right. We're mostly focused, as we've said many times, on the legal part. You're taking understanding this in a very
but I'm saying why
I've
it
never
is.
seen anybody.
Why? Well, let me ask you something. Why did he pick a pile of wheat?
The Rambam? No, I don't know. I mean, wheat is the foundation of bread, and
right.
it's not so uncommon to find.
How about botzina de cartenuta?
Yeah,
the word botzina de cartenuta. Does there any relation between what Rambam said to the botzita de cartenuta?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. But again, you're interpreting this on a very different plane.
Well, I'm trying to understand what you're.
No, I understand.
I can break down everything that you said into this, so I'm able to understand what you're saying. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't understand one word you're saying in Hebrew. So So the point is,
you're processing it in your way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we have to stop probably have to stop, but yeah. So I just wanted to add one other thing for a moment. Okay, I'm just going to mention it, and then we'll pick up with the rest of these Marmakomos to finish up next time. But we're going to, after this topic, we're going to move to the might makes right view called Almgar. That's a very exciting topic for everybody on all levels. So it's just interesting to note that, again, all the Rishonim were asking the original question, why here we say Shnai Mosim B'talas Yachloku, right? Two people arguing and they divide. And why in Bava Basra, in the boat case, we say Kol Alam Gava, meaning whoever, we can't do anything, so we're going to let you struggle, and whoever gets, whoever ends up with the object is going to keep it, at least for now. So it's interesting that if you look at the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch, with this I'll end, they present Yachloku, Shnai Mosim B'talis, and Kol Alam Gavar back to back in back-to-back chapters, Siman Kuf Lamed Ches and Siman Kuf Lamed Tes, 138 and 139 in Chosha Mishpat, in the code of Jewish law, of civil law, right, of the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch. Kuf Lamed Ches is Yachloku, and Kuf Lamed Tes is called Alim Gabar. But what's fascinating is that Rambam never classifies, he mentions Kol Alim Gavar, but he doesn't present it as like a classification. It's just a reality. In other words, if the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch were copying the Rambam, then the Rambam would have put Kol Alim Gavar, in Perek Tes. Now, he does have it in Perek Yud, but he has it in Perek Yud in a certain case that we'll discuss next time of, inter alia. But he really discusses the law, the ruling of Kol Alim Gavar, only like 6 chapters later, Perek Tes Vav, Hilchos Toin V'Nitan, Halacha Dalid, and almost as if it's like an afterthought, meaning this is what happens and this is the way to, break the deadlock, but not as if it's a psak. And the contrast between that treatment and his treatment of Yachloku is very stark and very significant. So that's number one. The second point to make is that this Rambam about the wheat, which we just discussed, there is another way to understand it. Even according to that way, the Rambam ends up saying that the chalukah of the Mishnah, the division, is on the basis of doubt, not certainty. but it doesn't mean that he has to part company with the requirement of Shnaim Ochazen. There's a suggestion that maybe the relationship to the wheat is also a ownership, or each one has an ownership claim over it, not or a potential ownership claim over it, depending on where it's situated. So I'm going to pick up next week when we finish all of this with the alternative reading of the Rambam, and then a couple of other points, and then we'll move on. Maybe I'll try to get more Marmukomos to discuss Kol de Alm Gavar. While I remember, just on a program note, I will be away December. I'm not sure. Is it a 10th? The 10th is it Tuesday?
The second Tuesday in December, you're right.
I'm away the second Tuesday in December. Is that the 10th?
Yeah, that sounds right. The 11th is Wednesday because I know Rabbi Goldstein, South Africa is coming. Yes, so it's the 10th.
Okay. So December 10th, I'll be away in Israel.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks for the heads up.
Okay. So to be continued, and then we'll move on to the next Gemaras. Yeah.
Okay. Call up. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Just a brief question, Rabbi.
Sure.
I read that the Rid has a different take on it and says instead of this physical shteim osim betalit, it's really that they think each one of them thinks they bought part of the talit.
No, one of the cases in the Gemara is that. That's not the Tosfos Rid. I mean, the Gemara has two cases. That's what they, to account for the more complex language of the Mishnah. Zeomer kulishali, zeomer kulishali, zeomer animat asiyah, zeomer animat asiyah. Well, we'll try to get to that next week also.
Okay,
The Gemara
good.
says that there are two cases. One is mitzia, where you found an object, and the other is mekachomemkar, where they're vying to acquire the object. So that's what he's referring to.
And the other thing, it seems contrajudicial and barbaric even that just whoever is the stronger of the
Yeah,
two.
we're going to discuss that. Yeah, we're aware. Okay. We know the problem, but we'll discuss the solution. I mean, not the solution, but we'll explain the different perspectives. Normally saying that might makes right, even in any way, is a very non-Jewish,
even ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein means.
So right. I mean, normally we don't say that. Right, but we'll see. Part like, what does the Rambam think it means? What does the Rush think it means? We'll definitely take.
And I will be patient till next week. Thank you very much, Yasher Koach.
Okay, have a good week, everyone, and we look forward to continuing.